The wedding of the day had come and gone. The rice had been thrown and Della Street Mason had married the man of her dreams the day before. Perry Mason was a kind and generous man who deeply loved his wife. He was a famous attorney and was off on a 7-week honeymoon. The cruise was going to be on one of the most prestigious ships on the sea, and Perry and Della were set up in one of the large suites with a private balcony and all the amenities. They had a hot tub right in the room, and Della was going to make sure that she and Perry made good use of it. Perry looked around the suite and liked what he saw. It had a large sliding glass door that went out to the balcony. There was a fully stocked bar and a huge king-sized bed in the middle of the room. The view of the ocean was amazing, and he knew that their honeymoon was going to be something to remember. There were flowers all over the suite. Everyone had sent flowers and best wishes to the couple. There were bottles of champagne and chocolates. Among all these were the 5 dozen roses that Della was sure were from Perry. The room smelled like a floral shop, and Della couldn't wait for their honeymoon to begin. As the two of them took their seats in the living room area of the suite, Perry put his arm around her. "Here is to be our new home for the next 7 weeks. I hope you like it." "Oh, Perry, it is beautiful. There must be so many things to see and do on the ship. The balcony and the view. We can eat out there sometimes, I bet," Della told him, and then leaned over and gave him a kiss. It was then that there was a knock on the door, and the men came in carrying the luggage. Della had brought 5 bags and Perry had brought 4 with him. They were going to be gone for 7 weeks, and they wanted to have all the things they needed. The workers put all of their things away for them, and Perry gave them a tip for the work that they did. They were all friendly and made sure that Perry and Della had everything that they were going to need. Perry took a look around and picked up one of the brochures with a list of what was going on the ship during the trip. Tonight was the going out to sea party with dancing and partying that would go on through the night almost. Once he and Della got sick of the party, they could go back to their suite and enjoy the privacy of their large balcony. The ship was to leave at 5 and it was 4:30, so Perry and Della headed up on deck to wave goodbye to the people who were standing at the pier, watching the big ship as she left. It was a tradition, and although neither one of them had anybody there that they knew, they went up to say goodbye to land. They would not reach Hawaii for a week. The going away party was fun, and they even joined in on a couple of the games. They did the limbo, although Perry was unable to go down very far, and then they danced the locomotion. They partied until after midnight and then headed back to their suite. Even though it was late, they went out on the balcony and held each other tight as they watched the stars glitter along with the lights of the ship. From the balcony they could still hear the music of the party, and they had their own party of their own. Della had chosen a special gown for the first evening that she and Perry would be spending on their honeymoon. It was a pale blue floor-length gown with a matching see-through robe overlying it. As she stepped out of the bathroom, Perry looked up with genuine awe and approval. The gown that she had worn on their wedding night had been beautiful. He had thought that she would not have anything any more beautiful, but was pleasantly surprised. This choice of a nightgown was every bit as nice as the one that she had worn on their wedding night. As he came to her and put his arms around her, he felt the love that one can only explain as full. He wanted to be with her, and he lifted her up and carried her to the bed. It had been a long night, and they had finally climbed into their honeymoon bed at 1 that night and stayed in bed until 8 the following morning. It was a late morning for either of them, as they both were used to be up and on their way to work before 8 every morning during the week. Getting up on board a ship in the middle of the ocean with the woman you love is something that Perry Mason had dreamed of. As he got up and looked down at Della, who was still sleeping with love, she was the lady of his life, and he could not wait to spend the next few weeks with her alone and in the privacy of a world where there was no work, just pleasure. The two spent a long while out on their private balcony and had coffee made by their private butler. They watched the water and laid back in their comfortable deck chairs together. The weather was warm and the sun shone onto the two lovers who had worked hard to find the love that they had. They sat there for over an hour and then decided to make their way down to the breakfast buffet. Della had learned from her last cruise that she should have brought with her sensible clothes and shoes, so she chose a nice pantsuit to wear for this day. The buffet was wonderful, and as they sat outside on the deck, they took in the sun and the salty air. Afterwards they both went up on deck and sat outside where they could meet other passengers and listen to the music. Della and Perry both went in the pool and then sat down on the deck chairs and enjoyed more sun. There were things to do no matter where you went on the ship. They had decided that they would join in on some of the things that were made for couples such as them. There were card games, trivia games, dancing contests, so many things, and Della wanted to do them all. Perry was not sure if he was in the right condition for some of them, but he was a trooper and would try anyways. That night they went to one of the many theaters on board and enjoyed the show. Once again they arrived back at their suite very late. Della wanted to try out the hot tub and Perry joined her. It was a wonderful hot tub, and in the privacy of their own suite they decided to not wear any clothes when they sat in it. The jets were so soothing and the bubbles felt so good that they both did not want to get out. They rested and relaxed, but hugged and loved each other together in the hot tub as only a man and a woman could. The next few days were much the same as the newlyweds got used to sharing their lives completely. It was a match that had been made in heaven. And the two of them did not stay apart for more than a few minutes. Each time they walked the deck they held hands and laughed as they met other people on the ship who were on their honeymoons also. By the fourth day of the honeymoon cruise, Della and Perry had made good friends with Carla and Barry Drew. They were from the city of Boston. He was a police officer and she was a nurse at one of the local hospitals. They had made the best of friends, and Della and Perry felt as though they had been friends with each other for a long time. Barry's brother Jim was stationed in Hawaii and Barry was looking forward to seeing him. "We would like to have you come and meet him too. He has been stationed there for almost a year now and I haven't seen him since he left for duty." Barry invited them. That night Della and Perry decided it was time to try some on-board bingo. There was a free cruise credit of $5,000 for the grand prize and Della could not resist the chance. Barry and Carla came over and sat with them. They were big bingo players and had been playing the entire cruise. It was the fifth game and Della won $50. They all played to the end of the games, but no one else won. It was fun and Della and Perry vowed to play at least once more on the cruise. That night it was another dinner and dance. They chose to have their dinner at one of the Thai and suit restaurants that the ship was famous for. They both enjoyed dressing up and they had not had a formal dinner since their wedding. Most of the meals were included in the price of the cruise, but the restaurant that they chose that night was extra. That is when Perry decided to go all out for their dinner that night. He ordered the best of champagne and prime rib. Everything was delicious and he and Della had a wonderful dinner. This time the special dance was dances from the 40s and Perry and Della had a great time. Perry requested that the band played their wedding song "I Will Love You Always" and they danced to it slowly. It was going to be their own dance forever, he hoped. They met other people on the cruise and once again did not get back to their suite until way after midnight. Della had chosen many negligées to wear on her honeymoon and this night was no exception. She came out of the bathroom dressed to captivate her husband and it worked. Perry smiled at his sexy loving wife and took her in his arms. Della smiled up at him and asked, "I could not decide whether or not we should have fun in the hot tub once again or just go to the bed. It is too tough a decision for me. What would you like?" she teased him. Perry looked at Della and smiled. She was so pretty standing there in the long gown. Perry thought that he could eat her up right there and then, but He bent down and kissed her passionately. "I think that it is time for bed," he laughed and picked her right up and placed her on the bed. Again it was a late night at the Mason suite. To say that the time on board the ship was wonderful was putting it lightly. Perry and Della had many hours of sun, games and music, and when they were tired it was time for them to go to their suite and enjoy the time to themselves. The suite was a wonderful place for the privacy that any honeymoon couple would appreciate. The next day the ship was going to be landing on the island of Hawaii and they both could not wait. The ship would stay at dock for the next few days where everyone on the ship could visit the islands and take tours at their own leisure. They both were looking forward to spending time with their friends and by themselves also. There was going to be a luau the next evening and they had signed up to join the fun. Perry was interested in the dancing girls, after all he was human. He loved Della and would never even consider looking at another woman for any other reason than entertainment. As the ship docked, Della was pleased to see that their suite faced the island. There were many shows that the people of Hawaii threw close to the ship, and she thought that it would be fun to watch them from the privacy of their own balcony. Della wanted to go up to the top for the arrival party. On this ship there was a party for everything. Perry laughed as they hurried up to the deck to once again partake in the ceremony. There was liquor and food for everyone and the two of them stood there and laughed along with their new friends Barry and Carla. Della and Perry left the ship for the first time in 5 days and had to get their land legs back. They had not noticed how they had adjusted to the movement of the ship and their legs were very wobbly as they stepped off the ship. This would be their day to explore, as tonight they were going to meet Barry's brother and join in on the luau. The island was beautiful, picture perfect, as they made their way to the sightseeing bus that they were going to be raking for a tour of the area. The bus was an outside bus with little protection from the heat and sun, and Della was glad that she had brought lots of sunscreen with her. They stopped several times and looked at much of the floral. Della and Perry had chances to get their pictures taken and then they went out for a Hawaii meal. The food was delicious and they had a great time. When they got back to the ship, they barely had time to get dressed for the evening. As they came down to the main lobby, Barry and Carla were waiting for them. The four newlyweds were off to a good time and laughed as they walked to the large party. It was there that they met Barry's brother Jim. He was a tall, dark and handsome man. He was 27 and stood just over 6 feet tall. He introduced them to Mindy, his friend, and they all took a seat. It was quite the party with lots of cheering and dancing. It was the first time that Della had ever seen Perry actually take his hat off and really get into the fun of the party. He danced and sang and held her tight. It was a night that she hoped that he and her would never forget. When the four of them finally arrived back at the ship, Della and Perry were very tired. There would be no hot tub tonight. That would wait until the following morning. Della got into one of her nightgowns and came out of the bathroom. She was surprised to find Perry standing out on the balcony, just watching the beach. She came over to her love and put her arms around his waist. He turned and smiled at her. She was the most beautiful lady in the world and he was the luckiest man to have caught her. He stood there on the balcony with her in his arms and kissed her passionately. They walked arm in arm to the honeymoon bed once more. The next day was spent on the beach. The beach was breathtaking, and even though Perry disliked the sand in his toes, he made up his mind that he would make the best of it and enjoy the beach and sand with Della. Barry and Carla saw them and came over to take a seat on the blanket next to them. It turned out that Barry was a good swimmer and he and Perry went out into the water while the girls stayed on the beach. Carla and Della had not had much time to talk without the men around, and Della was glad to have someone who she had become friends with here in the 50th state of the Union. There they were sitting on one of the most picturesque beaches on the island. Carla helped Della put sunscreen on her back and shoulders as they watched the men enjoying the water. "I could stay here forever. It is so nice, and Barry, he is the man of my dreams. She smiled happily. I know what you mean. When we get back to LA, it will be back to work for us. It is a good life, really, and that is how we met. I would never give up working with my husband no matter what. But it is nice to get away for a while, and 7 weeks is like heaven to us. Della told her. I have heard of you from the television, and whenever they showed your husband on television you were by his side. I thought that you made a nice couple even with the cameras. It has been wonderful getting to know the two of you, Carla said with a smile. The two women watched the men for a few more minutes, then decided to go down to the water and join the men. The water was very warm, and Della did not have to test it with her toes first. The water was so clear that she could see her feet. Perry grabbed her and gave her a big kiss right there in the water, and she laughed. They went down under the water and looked at each other through the salty water. That burned her eyes a little, but she could not help but enjoy the time with her new husband. As it came time for dinner, the four of them were happy to see that the ship had a dinner all planned and ready on the ship itself. They were all tired by this time, but hungry. When they went back to their cabins to get ready for lunch, they agreed to meet each other at Perry and Della's suite in 2 hours. Della wanted to take a nap, but Perry had ordered their lunch delivered to the suite. It was a good idea. They would have some time to themselves. And they could rest together also. They had 2 hours, and Perry headed out to the balcony to relax and watch the scenery. Della laid down on the bed for just a few minutes and was surprised to hear the knock on the door. It was the man with their lunch. She had not realized that she had fallen asleep for over half an hour. Perry had looked in on his wife and saw that she was sleeping. He knew that poor Della was exhausted and had tried to get to the door before the knock. Had woken her up, but he hadn't been fast enough. The waiter brought the lunch out to the balcony as he asked, and left them in peace. The view was wonderful and the food was good and hot. They sipped lemonade and enjoyed their time together. That afternoon the two of them and their friends would be going back to the beach. It was going to be another busy day. Their friends came over to the suite right on time, and Perry let them in. Carla was very impressed with the suite. It was much larger than their room, where they also had a balcony, but it was only about 1/2 the size of Della and Perry's. They looked around at amazement at the hot tub and the fancy furnishings. It was then that they realized how much above the Masons than they were on the social ladder. But they were so friendly and hardly the type of people that you would consider snobbish. They were both friendly and outgoing, and the four of them headed out together to the beach, laughing and talking the whole time. They found a good place on the beach, and Barry and Perry thought it would be fun to try to build a sand castle. The two of them worked on it while Della and Carla watched for hours. They had it made with 2 floors and a mold. They had made a tower, and Della took pictures of the two of them as they stood beside it with pride. They all went in the warm, clean water and enjoyed the surf. It was a wonderful hot day, and they stayed on the beach until after 5. They headed back to the ship once again. This time they would see each other the next day. Della and Perry wanted to spend the night together in their suite. Perry ordered a private meal on the balcony with steak, baked potatoes, and a large salad. Della and he would decide what kind of dessert they would have later on that evening. Despite wearing sunscreen, they were both sunburned and very tired. The hot tub was the place for them to relax, and they both climbed in and sat together, letting the jets beat on their skin. The water was very warm, and it was very soothing to their burns and sore backs and feet. Della thought that she was still young, but she wasn't as young as she used to be. Perry, on the other hand, was aware that he was past 30, and the past few days had just affirmed that fact. The night was wonderful, and Della and Perry spent the night enjoying each other's company. The view and smell of the ocean was wonderful, and the dinner was great. Tomorrow would be another busy day.